There are moments in life when prayer feels like a voice thrown into endless space, drifting without echo, and the silence hurts because your heart wonders whether heaven has forgotten your name. Many believers carry this ache quietly, told that unanswered prayers mean weak faith or divine refusal, while inside they grieve, whispering to themselves that maybe they simply do not know how to reach God anymore. Yet long before doctrine hardened into ritual, Jesus lived and breathed a way of prayer so alive and powerful that reality itself bent under the weight of his inner alignment. When he stood at Lazarus' tomb, surrounded by mourners and the stench of death, he did not plead, beg, or bargain, but lifted his eyes and thanked the Father as if the miracle was already written across time. The words he spoke trembled with strange authority, for he did not say, "Hear me," but "You have heard me," declaring completion before the stone had moved or the grave had yielded its captive. That single moment reveals a hidden dimension of prayer, a forgotten practice buried beneath centuries of noise, where Jesus did not ask God to act but stepped into a state where the work was already finished. If you look closely through the Gospels, a quiet pattern emerges like a trail of footprints, showing that every miracle was preceded not by request, but by an interior turning that few teachers dare to name. Before power moved through him, Jesus withdrew from the noise, separated from the crowd, and entered a stillness deeper than thought, like a traveler stepping inside a hidden chamber beneath his own soul. When he healed the paralytic, Scripture records that he saw their faith, yet between the seeing and the speaking, there was a silent moment where his awareness shifted into perfect unity with the Father. When he fed the 5,000, he did not beg heaven for bread, but lifted the loaves in quiet gratitude, aligning with the unseen abundance that already existed beyond the limits of earthly scarcity. Before walking upon the storm-torn waters, he climbed the mountain alone to pray, not to escape people, but to return to the inner center where his human self dissolved into divine coherence. When the woman with the issue of blood touched him, he did not decide to heal her. Instead, power flowed through him freely, because he was already living in the state where heaven and earth were joined. Again and again the same movement returns like an echo: solitude, silence, inner alignment, and then a surge of authority that reshaped the world around him without strain or hesitation. The tragedy is that this method did not vanish because it was forbidden, but because it cannot be standardized, cannot be reduced to ritual, and cannot be controlled by systems built on external religion. Over time, Christianity became louder on the outside and quieter on the inside, teaching words without stillness, forms without depth, prayers without the interior foundation that Jesus himself embodied. The instructions were never removed from Scripture, yet the practice faded, like a door left unopened until dust gathered across its handle and generations forgot that it ever led anywhere at all. In Matthew 6, Jesus spoke of that door, saying, "When you pray, go into your room and close the door," words that many read as guidance about privacy but miss as a map toward interior awakening. The word he used did not describe a bedroom or chamber built of stone, but a hidden treasury, an inward sanctuary beyond the surface mind, a sacred center guarded by silence and awareness. Jesus was not telling believers merely to withdraw from public attention, but to journey inward, to enter the place beneath identity where fear, ego, and striving cannot follow. And when he said close the door, he did not mean try harder to focus, but seal yourself off from the voices of doubt, anxiety, memory, and longing that fragment the heart and scatter the spirit. For the Father, he said, dwells in secret, not distant in the sky or concealed in temples, but present in the hidden stillness where the soul becomes quiet enough to recognize divine nearness. Jesus returned to that inner sanctuary before every act of power, again and again, because he understood that authority does not rise from effort, but from alignment with the one who works through us. He was not performing magic, nor commanding by personal strength, but becoming the vessel through which the will of God flowed unhindered into the world of flesh and dust. This is why he said, "The Father within me does the work, not beside me or above me, but within, expressing power through a human life surrendered to oneness rather than trapped in separation." Over centuries, however, believers were trained to pray with words instead of silence, with imagination instead of awareness, hoping God might hear them rather than entering the place where God already dwells. The result was a faith filled with sincere devotion yet stripped of method, where people speak endlessly but rarely step across the threshold into the stillness that Jesus treated as essential. Monasteries preserved faint traces of this interior path, but for many outside those walls, prayer became an external act instead of an interior transformation, a ritual of speech instead of a movement of being. Yet the invitation remains alive, pulsing beneath every gospel page, calling hearts back to the inner room where the door still waits for those willing to approach in humility and perseverance. Jesus understood that prayer is not persuasion but coherence, not asking God to move from outside, but entering the state where human will and divine will breathe as one unbroken current. In that union, time loses its edge, and what is unseen becomes already accomplished. So words are spoken not from longing but from recognition, not from hope but from certainty of alignment. That is why he thanked the Father before Lazarus rose, because in the realm of cause the work was complete, though the world of form had not yet caught up with what heaven already knew. This is not arrogance, nor mystical pride, but the natural expression of a soul that has stepped beyond separation, where the self no longer competes with God but becomes an instrument of divine expression. Jesus did not try to manipulate reality, nor claim private ownership of power, but surrendered so completely that his words carried the current of the one who spoke through him. It is here that many believers struggle, because they attempt to pray from the anxious mind, from worry, fear, and hunger, yet wonder why their words lack the weight that echoed in the voice of Christ. But separation cannot command alignment, and the world does not bend to ego. It responds only to the presence of the one who moves through a heart that has yielded every claim to control. That is why Jesus withdrew into solitude so often, not to escape responsibility but to silence the noise of identity, to step again into the inner room where the door led to union. The wilderness before his ministry was not punishment but preparation. 40 days peeling away every illusion of self until only pure awareness remained, resting in the will of the Father. On mountains, in deserts, in silent places before dawn, he kept returning to that inner sanctuary, because without alignment, words become empty and miracles become impossible. In those quiet hours, he remembered who he was beyond the limits of flesh, not by claiming divinity as possession, but by surrendering into the divine life already within him. And when he emerged from that stillness, the world felt different, for he no longer spoke as a separate man calling on distant power, but as a vessel through which heaven itself breathed. The heart of this path is not dramatic fireworks but gentle recognition, where the restless self fades and a deeper presence rises, subtle yet stronger than every fear or doubt. Many who attempt this become impatient, expecting immediate revelation or emotional intensity, yet the inner room opens not through force but through persistence, humility, and quiet trust. The door does not yield to anxiety or ambition, but to the soul that learns to sit in silence long enough to discover that it is not the voice of thought, but the awareness beneath it. The first step, therefore, is not speaking but stopping, not performing prayer but ceasing to perform, breathing softly while every layer of noise loosens its grip upon the heart. In that stillness, memories rise and fall, worries tug and pull, yet slowly the surface quiets, and a deeper calm emerges like a hidden river flowing from beneath the foundations of the mind. This calm is not dramatic or loud, but gentle and intimate, closer than breath, closer than heartbeat, a presence that does not come from outside but awakens from within. Standing at the edge of this presence feels like waiting before a sacred threshold, where the soul trembles not in fear, but in reverence for something vast and tender beyond words. If you resist the urge to speak, to ask, to reach outward, you begin to recognize that the one you sought has never been distant, but has waited patiently within the hidden chamber of your spirit. This recognition does not arrive as vision or thunder, but as quiet certainty, a knowing deeper than emotion, telling you that you are no longer outside looking in, but standing within the doorway of union. From here, the journey is not about earning power or mastering technique, but about remaining present, letting the small self step aside so that the life of God may move freely through you. Jesus lived in that movement, returning to it again and again, until alignment became his natural state and miracles flowed not as extraordinary events, but as expressions of unbroken communion. Every healing, every word of authority, every moment where storms calmed and bodies rose, sprang from that hidden place where his heart and the Father's heart beat as one. This is the foundation he invited humanity into, not a ritual to perform, but a consciousness to enter, a kingdom within that can only be known through silence, surrender, and recognition. It is not reserved for saints or mystics, nor locked inside monasteries, but offered to every soul willing to close the door, turn inward, and discover the presence already waiting in secret. Yet few are taught this, because it cannot be controlled, measured, or standardized, and so the world clings to outer forms while the inner treasure remains hidden in plain sight. But the invitation has begun to awaken again in many hearts, stirring hunger not for louder prayers, but for deeper stillness, not for greater effort, but for truer alignment. Those who respond discover that the journey is patient and slow, yet every step inward reveals a gentleness that heals old wounds and melts the fear of separation. The mind may resist, but the soul recognizes the path, for it is the same path Jesus walked before every miracle, the path back into the inner room where the Father dwells in secret. And once you have touched that presence even briefly, the world outside feels different, as if every moment whispers that heaven is nearer than you ever imagined. This is the threshold, the beginning of transformation, where prayer ceases to be a plea and becomes a state of being, a quiet union preparing the way for power to move. Chapter 1 rests here, at the doorway of the inner room, where silence deepens and alignment awakens, and the soul prepares to step further into the mystery that awaits beyond the closed door. For in the next chapter, the journey continues past stillness into union, where alignment becomes authority, and the life of God begins to speak through the surrendered heart with unshakable certainty. The journey into the inner room does not end at stillness, because silence is not the final destination, but the sacred threshold where alignment awakens and the soul learns what it means to live in union with the Father. When Jesus closed the door to the outer world, he did not remain only in peaceful quiet, for beyond the silence there was a deeper shift, where identity dissolved and the boundary between self and source faded into oneness. In that hidden place, prayer stopped being a request traveling upward toward heaven, and became a movement rising outward from the center of his being, where the Father worked not beside him, but through him. This is the mystery that frightened theological systems but nourished the hearts of mystics, because it revealed that the truest form of prayer is not spoken from separation, but from union so complete that human will and divine will breathe as one. When Jesus said the Father and I are one, he was not boasting of privilege or claiming unreachable status, but describing the interior state he entered whenever he closed the door and surrendered to the presence within. In that state, there was no struggle, no pleading, no anxiety about outcome, because the future had already aligned with the purpose of heaven, and his words carried the certainty of something already finished in the unseen realm. That is why he spoke to storms as one who possessed authority, not because he claimed power for himself, but because he had stepped aside and allowed the voice of the Father to speak through his surrendered humanity. When he said to the paralytic, "Rise and walk," those words were not attempts at persuasion, but recognition of a reality already restored in the inner realm where alignment had completed the work before the body obeyed. When he called Lazarus from the tomb, he did not command with desperation, but with the calm strength of one who had already witnessed the resurrection within the place of union before he ever spoke aloud. And this union was not instant or effortless, for even Jesus returned again and again to the wilderness of silence, shaping his awareness through surrender until his soul rested naturally in alignment with the Father's heart. This is why he withdrew after crowds praised him, because applause awakens ego, and ego blocks the flow of divine power by replacing surrender with self-importance and stillness with noise. This is why he prayed before choosing the 12 disciples, because decisions made from personality lead to confusion, while choices made from union carry the wisdom of the one who sees beyond time. This is why he knelt in Gethsemane, trembling with human anguish, yet still returning to the inner room, where at last his prayer became not "let my will be done," but "let yours move through me." The path he walked was not about escaping human emotion, but about surrendering it, allowing sorrow, fear, and longing to melt into the presence of God until only alignment remained. And this is the place where most believers hesitate, because the doorway to union requires releasing control, surrendering identity, and trusting a silence that feels empty before it reveals its fullness. Many approach the inner room hoping to gain power, yet true power emerges only when the desire for power dissolves, and the soul seeks nothing but the presence of the one within. The ego cannot cross that threshold, because ego prays from separation, from lack, from the hunger to be seen, while union begins only when the self becomes quiet enough to step out of the way. This is why prayer often feels powerless, because it is spoken from the outside, from the anxious mind, instead of from the inner room where the Father already abides in unbroken peace. But those who learn to enter the inner room discover that alignment grows slowly, like dawn breaking across the horizon, revealing layer after layer of presence until the heart finally recognizes its home. At first it may feel like emptiness, because the soul is no longer grasping outward, yet as stillness deepens, a gentle warmth rises from within, and the presence becomes unmistakable. It is not emotional intensity or spiritual excitement, but a quiet awareness that feels stronger than fear and kinder than every voice of doubt that once ruled the inner world. When this awareness takes root, prayer no longer comes from longing, because the one who speaks is no longer the fearful self but the surrendered spirit aligned with the Father's will. And in that moment something extraordinary happens. Words become fewer, breath becomes slower, and the soul realizes that God is not being invited into prayer. God is already praying through you. This is the shift Jesus lived within, the turning point where he no longer acted as an individual asking heaven to move, but as the vessel through which heaven moved freely into the visible world. That is what gave his words weight, why his voice carried authority, because they did not arise from effort or striving, but from the still center where the Father's intention flowed into human speech. For this reason, prayer in the inner room does not chase after miracles, because miracles are not goals to be achieved but natural expressions of alignment when separation has fallen away. The more a person returns to that place, the more their desires change, because ego-driven prayers slowly dissolve and are replaced by a deeper longing to simply remain in the presence of God. This is the transformation Jesus invited his followers into, not merely to imitate his actions, but to share in his consciousness, to live in the same union where prayer becomes a state of being. When he spoke of the kingdom of heaven within, he was not describing a faraway realm, but the interior life awakened when the door is closed and the inner room becomes the dwelling place of the heart. Those who walk this path discover that life itself begins to shift, because decisions are no longer made from fear, reactions no longer rise from insecurity, and the soul rests with deeper confidence in divine guidance. The world may look unchanged, yet perception becomes clearer, and what once felt overwhelming now appears as something that can be carried with grace because the soul is no longer carrying it alone. Over time, prayer stops being a moment in the day and becomes a constant awareness, a quiet companionship where every breath is shared with the presence of God within. This is not escape from the world but deeper engagement with it, because union fills the heart with compassion, patience, and strength that cannot be manufactured through effort or willpower. The one who lives from the inner room does not become distant or detached, but more alive, more gentle, more courageous, because they are no longer acting from emptiness but from fullness. And just as Jesus returned to alignment again and again, so must anyone who seeks this path, for union is not a single experience but a lifelong rhythm of surrender and returning. Some days the door opens easily, and stillness greets you like an old friend, yet other days the mind resists and the heart feels restless, but perseverance itself becomes part of the transformation. For every time you sit in silence, every moment you release the anxious voice and return to awareness, the soul strengthens its ability to recognize the presence waiting in secret. And gradually the boundary between prayer time and daily life fades, until even ordinary moments carry a quiet glow, as if the inner room has expanded to fill every step of your journey. This is when prayer becomes not an action you perform but a place you live, where the heart remains aligned even in struggle, and the presence of God flows through your choices, words, and relationships. It does not mean life becomes painless, for even Jesus faced rejection, grief, and anguish, but suffering no longer isolates the soul, because union keeps the heart anchored in divine nearness. In this state, forgiveness becomes possible where resentment once ruled, peace remains where fear once dominated, and strength rises from the same presence that empowered Christ to endure the cross. This inner life is not about escaping reality but about embodying heaven within it, carrying the presence of the Father into every moment, conversation, and encounter. And as alignment deepens, words spoken from that place carry a quiet authority, not loud or dramatic, but filled with the patience and compassion of the one who speaks through love rather than force. Jesus lived as the doorway where heaven and earth embraced, and every believer who learns to enter the inner room begins to experience that same sacred calling, to become a vessel of divine expression. This calling does not elevate one above others, but draws the soul downward into humility, because the closer one moves toward union, the more they recognize that everything flows from grace. It is in this humility that authority becomes safe, because it is no longer claimed for ego, but entrusted to a heart that has surrendered to the will of the Father within. And as the soul continues to walk this path, faith is no longer fragile belief struggling to survive doubt, but a deep knowing grounded in experience of the presence that never leaves. The inner room becomes not just a place of prayer, but the center of identity, where you remember who you truly are beyond fear, beyond failure, beyond every story the world has written over your life. You begin to understand why Jesus spoke with such calm confidence, because he lived continually from that place of remembrance, where he knew himself not merely as a man, but as a vessel of divine purpose. And in time, you realize that the miracle was never only about power moving outward, but about transformation moving inward, reshaping the heart into a dwelling place for the presence of God. This is why Jesus invited people not merely to believe, but to follow, because the path he walked was not an unreachable mystery, but a living invitation to union with the Father. The world forgot the method, but the door remains open, the inner room still waits in silence, and the presence of God continues to call every soul willing to step inside. The journey may be slow, it may feel subtle and hidden, but with each return to stillness, the heart draws nearer to the same alignment that empowered Christ to speak with authority and compassion. And one day, without realizing when it happened, you discover that prayer is no longer an effort you begin, because you have stopped visiting the inner room and have started living there. You walk through the world anchored in silence, acting with tenderness, speaking with clarity, and carrying within you the same presence that moved through Jesus when he thanked the Father before the miracle appeared. From that place, faith becomes not a hope that God might act, but a quiet recognition that the Father is already at work, shaping reality through every moment of alignment and surrender. This is the life Jesus revealed through his example, the life hidden beneath centuries of noise, now awakening again in hearts longing for something deeper than ritual and louder than words. It is the life where prayer ceases to be a distant conversation and becomes a living union, where the Father works through those who have learned to close the door and rest in the presence within. And as you continue to enter that inner room again and again, you will discover what Jesus knew, that the miracle is not only what happens outside, but the transformation of the soul itself. For the greatest wonder is not that Lazarus rose, or storms obeyed, or bodies healed, but that a human heart can become so aligned with God that heaven finds a willing home within it. And when that happens, prayer is no longer spoken from earth toward heaven, but from heaven within the heart toward the world, carrying peace, compassion, and unshakable love wherever you go. This is the destiny of the inner room, the meaning of the forgotten method, the invitation Jesus left for all who seek, to live not from separation, but from union with the Father who dwells in secret. And when you learn to remain in that union, when you breathe from that presence and walk in that alignment, you will know that the door has never truly closed, because you're no longer standing outside looking in. You are living where Jesus lived, speaking from where he spoke, resting where he rested, in the sacred stillness where prayer becomes power, and the Father works through you in quiet, eternal love.